very interesting. Okay, so everybody knows they're being recorded. So the first thing I need to do is introduce you to Anna. Those of you who've been on before or been at MII conferences and so on, probably know both Anna and Bob, but just in case. And by the way, I noticed Scott Alexander somewhere there in the audience. So he's either linking in from the jury itself, or else he's not been chosen today. So hello, Scott. Anna Doyle is an international network coordinator of the MII. She's a mediator for 17 years, and she's an international public servant for 5 decades. That's a long time, Anna. She works mainly in the areas of justice and of air navigation, and I'm sure the trials with Boeing are keeping you occupied at the moment, and business ethics. And she specializes in international workplace mediation from her own practice in Waterloo in Belgium, where she serves the UN Global Mediation Panel and other organizations, international organizations. So welcome, Anna, and thank you for being part of the panel. And the second panelist is Bob Creagh. Bob is also an MII council member. He's followed a career in corporate and project recovery, but he now practices as a mediator and a dispute negotiator. Bob is both CEDAR and MII accredited and has been assisting clients resolve contractual performance and technical disputes in a major program and project management space for the last 20 years. He acts primarily in commercial workplace and civil service or civil sector mediation, with a focus on small and medium enterprises, family-owned businesses, partnerships, and individuals. So for those who don't know me, as the panelist, I need to introduce myself too. I've been working in the area of facilitation and conflict since the mid-80s. Most of my work at that stage, and for about 30 years afterwards, was with community, local and development community projects that got either Irish government or EU funding. I trained for many years, maybe 10, 12, I can't remember, 13 years. I was training people to become MII accredited mediators. Then I wrote a book on the Mediators Toolkit. It's on asking questions in mediation, which was to take 4 months and took 5 years. So if anyone is ever thinking of writing a book, please do contact me for a call, and I'll fill you in on all the things that could go wrong, or the things that could go right. So subsequent to that, I developed online training based on those, advanced online training based on those questions. So that's myself as the panelist. Coming back to our discussion of the panel, back to Bob and back to Anna, I loved the part where Celeste started with asking the audience, have they ever unfriended somebody on Facebook, or have they ever avoided someone? And I just love to know, what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. Maybe I'll jump in here. Well, I was a bit nervous about coming on today because I was saying, we're going to be having a conversation about conversations. But Jerry, you're really the maestro when it comes to questions, and when it comes to really turning this into a great art. So I'm hoping now that the questions won't be too easy, or won't be too difficult, and that you won't be marking us at the end of it. So in relation to people unfriending people or avoiding people, I think it's interesting. There are probably two different actions. One is to unfriend somebody is really a positive action that you have to take, but to avoid somebody, that's really that's a very different action altogether. And I think avoidance is something that I don't think we really realized at the time, but it takes a huge amount of energy. And in my experience in mediation, a lot of people who come to me would say, if they've been avoiding something, and maybe had been avoiding it for very many years, a huge amount of your energy is actually caught up in it. So I would say, if you're deciding between whether to unfriend somebody or to avoid them, I'd say go for the easy option and unfriend them, because avoiding can be a lifelong challenge, really.
Thank you, Anna. I disappeared. My internet dropped. I'm so sorry. And I don't know for how long I was speaking to myself, but I certainly sounded very boring. So thank you, Anna, for going with that. Bob, do you want to come in briefly on that one? And then I want to ask each of you what it was that struck you the most from Celeste's presentation. Bob.
Thanks very much, Shane. So in keeping with tradition of this, I'm going to have to start with a complaint, because we've been at this for a couple of months now, and there's lots of things that I'm supposed to be putting into my toolkit. And first of all, it was emotional intelligence, and then it was intellectual humility, and then I had to find capacity for compassion. So you're now asking me to have conversational competence. So I'm kind of filling up, which is, and I'm not quite sure I'm going to last the year, but we'll have a go at it anyway. When I first heard that phrase unfriending, I thought my initial absolute reaction to it was, how pathetic. Yeah, who unfriends people? And I think that the whole idea, there's lots of things that we're just taking as part of the sort of the lingua franca that we're not supposed to have. Like unfriending, to me, first of all, it sounds pathetic, and it sounds rather cowardly as well. And to pick up on Anna's point, yeah, deal with it. Avoiding, I think the person I spend most time avoiding is me. So I'd like to expand on that as we go along, because avoiding me for two reasons. A, because I know what's going on in my head, and that's probably best avoided. And secondly, it's also about getting out of my own way.
Hey, thanks, Bob and Anna. I'm just wondering, what do you think could be going on for a person who does this, who does unfriend or does avoid? What is it that's driving this particular reaction?
Well, I think it depends really on the environment that the person is in. You know, for example, I work mostly in international workplace mediation, and you know, it can be a matter nearly of self-preservation at times to have to unfriend or to avoid people very much in the workplace, especially if it's a large workplace. And sometimes people do this perhaps for their own protection. I mean, it depends really on the nature of the contact. It could be somebody might be being bullied, or might be being harassed, or whatever, or might be being intimidated, or might be, you know, a question of their dignity being affected really in the workplace. And perhaps they may well, unfriending is probably more in a private capacity, but they may really have to avoid people more in a workplace situation, which is actually very, very difficult to do, especially if it's somebody sitting across the table from you or in the next room. I mean, I'm sure we've all dealt with situations. I know I have, where people sitting opposite each other in the same room wouldn't speak for many years, and would actually be sending emails to each other. So this is really the complexity. So I would say it depends on the context of what the situation is, and that's my experience really from workplace, how difficult it actually can be, how challenging.
The unfriending then, Anna, it's not just like unfriending on Facebook or social media. The unfriending can be, as you say, sitting across a desk and not being able to have the conversation without doing it through email, in order to, at some level, protect myself. I know the first thing when Celeste mentioned that I thought of was COVID vaccine. The number of conversations I have avoided or not gone into, or said, I'm not going to that place for that discussion, directly to a friend of mine, because I really want to preserve our friendship, has been many times. And I often think it comes from some kind of a really deep value base. If I'm not able to actually talk about it, am I being paralyzed by my fear of having my beliefs or my own values challenged in some way? So then Celeste talked about building connections. If you want to come in next on this one, Bob, if you do want to contribute, building a connection and feeling understood. What was it about that that struck you?
I was quite taken aback because she said something there which was sensing the acceptance, and that really spoke to me. Is that when like none of us enter a conversation knowing how it's going to end. We enter a conversation aspiring to how it's going to end, which is I'm going to win, or I'm going to absolutely flatter people
Yeah.
with my brilliance. So that connection, and how do you build that connection?
Mm.
Because there's a lot going on for you as a conversationalist in saying, okay, how will I present? How will I be perceived? How will I communicate? And you're trying to do all of that whilst at the same time trying to make that connection. So I was quite taken by her, yeah, sensing the acceptance. And that's probably the quickest route to making that connection, that particularly in the early stages of any conversation, whatever you're in receive, you're absorbing rather than postulating.
Okay, thank you, Bob. And for you, Anna, what struck you in the need to build a connection and feeling understood, and how that all applies to mediation as well?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful how we really view this video and what she's advising us to do, because I think we have to remember that she's a host. I mean, she says herself, I'm a host. She's an entertainer. She's on radio. She's broadcasting. She has an audience. Okay, we have an audience here today, but it's still a more intimate situation than the kind of audience that she would be broadcasting to. And I noticed that the first time when she did her TED Talk, I think it was 2016, but she actually went on for several years to talk about the conversation that she had in 2016. I saw one even just recently this morning on 2021, May 2021. She was still talking about it. But apparently her original conversation was seen by 13 million people. And I thought, like, wow, 13 million people. And I mean, that's incredible. So we have to, I think we have to take what she says with a grain of salt. We're not in a comparable situation when we're talking about mediation. Our audience is usually an audience of one, or maybe an audience of two. And so I think a lot of the things that she recommends, a lot of the pointers and the tips that she gives, I don't really see that they're relevant to mediation. And maybe Bob might disagree with me on this, but I would take a lot of what she says really with a grain of salt. And I don't see the relevance. I mean, mediation is a conversation, but it's a conversation really with a purpose. And I think we're in a very, very different field than the field that she's speaking about as a host, as an entertainer, and really, appealing to the broadest possible audience. She's a showwoman. The shows that we don't put on shows in mediation, and the engagement that we have with our clients, I think it's in a completely different setting. So I'm between two minds really on this one. Yeah.
And we're facilitators of conversations in mediation. We're the conduit through which the conversation happens. So we might see some aspects of what she says within our parties' relation to each other, like not talking to each other, but only sending emails. But for you, Bob, thanks, Anna, is there anything in it that you see that does apply to mediation?
So I'm not going to disagree with Anna.
Come on, do.
No, I'm gonna have a facilitated dialogue, which I hope to win. So the amazing, the wonderful thing about conversations is that they are a complete and utter lottery. Yeah, every conversation is a lottery, and that's the beauty of them, because you never know what's coming next. So to Anna's point, we are facilitators. Like, to some extent, the conversation that is going on between two parties in a mediation is none of our business. What they're actually saying to each other, or what they're having, to some extent, is none of our business. But at the same time, it's entirely our business. But to bring it back to the conversation, every person in a conversation is a complete and utter expert in their position. So they are the experts. So when I come into a conversation, when I'm feeling really chill and really happy, and I'm promised myself I'm going to have a conversation, what I'm actually saying is, I'm actually going to try and be quiet, and I'm going to listen, because when I am absolutely fascinated by other people, and I work on the principle that I've only got one lifetime. Yeah, irrespective of whatever anyone's beliefs are, you get one go at this. So you're only going to have one lived experience. So why on earth would you limit yourself to that one lived experience when during your lifetime you've got the potential to bump into a good, many billions of other people, and every single one of them has got something to bring to the conversation. So they're the expert in it. You're trying to have a conversation. Most of it is letting your listening do the talking.
Absolutely. And I think she says that very clearly. She quotes F. Scott Peck as saying, true listening is setting aside yourself. And about, I often find when I'm starting maybe a joint session, not necessarily the separate meeting first, but the joint session, or if I'm doing a presentation, I spend the first few minutes being in my own way, and something clicks, and I say, you're thinking about yourself here, you're thinking about how you're doing, will it be okay? And I usually, with very bad language, tell myself to get out of my own way. And once I started to do that, I'm listening. And I used to see it with training mediators when they were, really nervous about the assessment. I used to say, just get out of your own way. The worst thing you can do is be in your own way. Remove yourself. And that brings us to what Celeste said is she said the number one important thing is listening. And that I think really does reflect in mediation. It's where you really could apply what she's saying in mediation. And, she says that quite often we're listening in order to give a reply, that we've already developed our reply, and we're coming in to interrupt with our reply before anyone has ever had a chance to continue through and do what you're suggesting, Bob, is allow them the opportunity to show us all the wonderful excellences that they can display when they're chatting, or to be, it stops us being amazed by what they say, because we're too busy filling in the blanks of what they're not saying. And we end up asking questions, I find, about the context, or about the sort of who else was there at the time, or could be investigative. Did anyone else hear this, or was it just yourself? Or we end up being judgmental in some way. And we do there's two other ones that I find are really popular. And one is asking about people, how they feel about it, or what's that been like for them. And the second really popular one is, so what do you think you might need, or what do you think could fix this? And all the while we're doing that, I think what we're doing is we're derailing the thought process of the person to whom we need to be listening, because we can't create a paradigm shift in what they're thinking unless we know what they're thinking. And we only know what they're thinking if we just prod them along right from the beginning to the end until they've reached their own conclusion. But we don't, we derail because we get in our own way, I think, many times. I wonder what you felt Celeste meant when she said the average person talks at a rate of 225 words per minute, and we listen at the rate of 500 words a minute, and we keep filling in those extra 225 words when we're listening, which means we are putting ourselves into what we're supposed to be hearing. What are your views on that? I thought that was a staggering statistic.
Well, I'm going to have to quote my father on this one, because my father gave me a lot of early advice, and the bits that I listened to have stood me in good stead. I just can't remember them all. But in this particular context, he did say the reason why you've got two ears and one mouth is that you're supposed to listen twice as much as you talk. Now, I'm not sure that my father invented that, but it certainly stuck with me. Now, the other thing he said to me was, when I want your opinion, I'll give it to you. We subconsciously we sometimes convey that in conversation, but if you look at that metric of you're supposed to listen twice as much as you talk, or you can listen twice as much as you can talk, and that's where it is for us. Like, if we take today we're having a conversation about conversations. And I want to bring back in what I've said in previous sessions. We have to reward the courage that it takes to come to mediation. And what greater reward for that courage would be a facilitated conversation. Because when parties come to mediation, they've stopped conversing quite often, or that conversing has broken down. And to bring them back to it, and if you apply this, and particularly in separating couples, the separating couple are almost certainly at some stage have been outstanding conversationalists, and they've lost the art of conversation. Now, it's not our role in the time that we have with them to bring that back, but it's to reward the courage, because the courage that it takes to go into a conversation with someone where that has broken down is really important. And I'll finish with the bit that sets us mediators aside from mere mortals is that we can listen, but it's the act of listening that sets us apart. Anyone can listen. It's the act of listening in any conversation.
Absolutely, so right. Bob, as a child, my goodness, I wonder what age were you told when you were told you were
I think 1, 2, 4.
every age. And did you learn?
Oh, I not as quick as I should have done. Let me put it like that.
Okay. Anna, do you want to come in?
Yeah,
Sorry, Anna, just before
yeah.
you, just somebody's come in the chat box and asked about the question why. And I have to, and I want your view on that if you want to bring that into your answer. I know my own view is put it in jail, never ask it, because it's asking someone to why is to give an analysis, all the things that we don't, what we need to ask is something like, so what was it that might have caused that to happen? But not the why. It engages rationalization and explanation. But so Anna, sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, I think there's different. I've heard different approaches to the why. Some people say that if you ask the question why, and if you ask it 6 times, if you don't ask anything else, but you just keep asking why to everything that they answer, some people say that you will actually get to the root of what the problem is. So maybe that's something that we can all try ourselves. You know, there's that hard question that maybe you're avoiding. Just actually ask yourself why in response to each question. You know, ask yourself the question, give yourself the answer, then ask yourself why, and then take that answer, and then ask yourself why again, and do it 6 times. It's actually a pretty scary. It's a pretty scary experience. But anyway, I just throw that out there. But Bob was speaking about when he was young, but when I was young, it just shows you how things have changed, because the motto at the time was that little children should be seen and not heard. Now, maybe I'm showing my age in actually saying that, but that's the way it was when I was a child. Little children should be seen and not heard. And I think, you know, how much life has actually changed now. Maybe for the better, I hope. But I was fascinated by that statistic where she said that 225, we talk at 225 words a minute, but we can listen at a speed of 500. And you know what I try to do is I try to make space in my mediation for silences and pauses. And usually at the beginning of a mediation, when I'm explaining to people how I work, I tell them that silences and pauses are really very important parts of a mediation. And I invite them to actually to practice it and to actually ask for a timeout. And that people can, you know, and I do this myself. I'll say, okay, maybe when I've heard the opening discussions from people, I'll say, okay, let's just take maybe a minute of silence, that we will just let that sink in, and that we will just, you know, not be trying to think of what we're going to do next, or not be trying to come up with an answer to what somebody has said, but let's just let it settle, you know. And in the beginning, maybe people feel it a little bit strange, but it actually is very much a part of how I carry out my mediations. And I invite them then at different times to say, look, if you want to have a pause or a silence, you know, you just ask for it, and just maybe a sign or something. Especially if we're moving really from that, you know, that very difficult part of a mediation where a skilled mediator can actually see you can see the solution and you can see the beginnings of an agreement kind of coming over the hill, but it's not for you to say it. And you usually see it coming behind the shoulders of the people that you're looking at. And they can maybe begin to feel it, but it's too early in the process yet. That's when I think silence, pauses, and just allowing people the opportunity of almost kind of catching up with themselves. I don't know, that's something that works well for me, I think.
And
it's
I couldn't.
valuable. Yeah.
Sorry, I have just interrupted you.
It's
Instead
a
of
pleasure
letting
to
you
be
do
it's a
what I'm
pleasure to be
about to
interrupted by
preach,
you, Jerry.
instead of letting you do what I'm about to preach with you, which is leaving the pause and the silence after someone finishes.
But you know, I'll be boasting about this in the future. I'll be saying, you know, Jerry O'Sullivan interrupted me once. It was a wonderful experience.
Oh, it won't be the first time, believe you me. I get very enthusiastic. No, I think what's making me enthusiastic in this stage in this juncture is that giving people the space to think. I think when we come in with those analytical or judgmental questions or comments, whatever they might be, or how to fix it, we stop their flow of thinking. But it's the pause that allows them to reflect. It may be the first time they've ever put that whole bunch of words together into one sentence and said it.
Yeah.
And they need to have that space to listen to what it is they've just said. It's like holding a mirror up and to reflect on it and to think, well, you know, maybe it wasn't that exactly. I think it might have been the other. And that gives them the space. And as you say, well, about not giving the answers, they have all the knowledge within themselves as to how they need to sort something. What they need is someone to listen so that they can calm down enough to start to think logically, to work out how to sort it. Yeah. So that's the listening. And I often think the filling in the gaps of information. And I think Celeste refers to it as well, that we only hear our own beliefs. But when we start filling in gaps in people's conversations for the other 225 words when we're listening, we're filling in our judgments, our assumptions about what they mean or could mean, and we're filling in so much of our own belief and value system, and we're mixing it in and crashing it into what they're saying, which isn't respectful. So yeah, so Bob, anything to do? Anything? Do you want to add anything to listening or asking questions or?
I think
thank
you, Jerry. I think I'm just really cautious about the word why, for two main reasons. One, the one person who taught me everything I know about mediation, she used to poke me with a stick every time I used the word why. And I know you don't do that anymore, Jerry, but so
I don't use the stick anymore, no.
And because we all want to know why, but if you don't ask why, you'll find out, and you'll find out the truth. You won't find out a response to the judgmental question of why if you don't use it. You'll let it come out. But the one why I have for me, and this is born out of both mediation and counseling practice, and that is, why do I talk? And the reason why I talk is to impress, communicate, convey my opinion, control the conversation. And lots of those are bad whys. They're bad answers to that question. Why do I listen? I listen to become wiser, to understand. And if you take that, why do I talk? And you say, well, when you're talking, and the counseling element of this is, before I ask or do something, I ask myself, is this in the service of my client? And if I have to ask that question and the answer is no, then don't do it. Don't ask it. And just on one editorial point, I think the statistics they come up with, that you can talk 225 words a minute, that survey was not done in Ireland at all. No way. It most definitely was not done in Ireland. Certainly not from parts of Ireland that I've both lived in and been to. 225 words, that would be like a slug on Valium compared to but but I like the statistic. So
I love it. I love it. I love it, Bob. Interestingly, she said, if you don't know, say you don't know. In terms of how would you apply that to mediation, or would you? Either Anna. Anna, do you want to come in next? Or Bob?
oh,
Yeah,
I
go
can
ahead.
I can see your Columbo-esque inquiry now, Jerry. And I go back to many of the professions that I've worked in, and many of my bosses have said, if you don't know, say so, but don't not know twice.
Okay. So
And that, I think, for a mediator is quite important, because there's things you need to know. And if you don't know them, you need to find out. How you find out is letting people have a conversation.
absolutely. Thanks, Bob. Anna.
If you don't know, say so. I don't really think this one applies to mediation so much, because in mediation, I think nobody knows. You know, ideally, we should be in a situation where the people are around the table. I like to think that they're in part of a creative process. And as a mediator, I'm working with them to help them to come up with the best outcome that they can.
So I'm trying to do two things at once.
Sorry, Anna. Just
Sorry, there's somebody coming in over me there.
could one of the co-hosts no, because they'll mute us as well.
Okay.
We're okay.
I think it's probably okay now. But I think it's okay to say you don't know, because really nobody knows. I mean, everybody has a desired state that they would like to get out of the mediation. But I think the magic of mediation is where you can actually enable that alchemy to take place between what one person wants, what the other person wants, and then the involvement of the mediator can actually enable that magic really to take place. And perhaps at the end of the day, what the outcome will be something that nobody ever thought of on the actually on the way in. Because when people are part of a creative process, they'll surprise you, they'll amaze you, they'll say and do things perhaps that they haven't ever said or done before. And they really will take the opportunity of making that leap. I'm thinking back to I think the first TED Talk that we did. I should probably call them TED Listens now more than TED Talks. But I remember Bob talking about recalling when he was young, and I think we were speaking about debating. And he was saying that he was at school, and he and another friend of his at school had written out everything that they were going to do in relation to a debate. One was speaking for the motion, the other was speaking against the motion. And when they were going into the debate, the teacher at the last minute just switched the briefs and said, okay, in you go, and now argue, but argue really on the other side. I thought that was a great example of actually what can happen in mediation. People can go into mediation looking for a certain outcome, but as a skilled mediator, if you really tune into what it is that people are looking for, there's the creative potential of, in a way, switching the briefs or enabling them to switch the briefs and enabling them to change their position. And I think that's really where the magic happens. I love that example that Bob told.
And it's very much touches on asking one party, if you happen to be the other party with their thoughts and feelings, what do you think might have been going on in their minds? What might they have worried about? So you're literally switching them. About the I don't know, I suppose I go back, as I always do, to the 40 bits of information per second that our brain has the capacity to absorb out of the 11 million bits per second that are available to us. And I think we really need to ask questions of our parties, like, what is it I don't know? And ourselves, we need to know that we don't know things, and we don't know at times, we don't know what we don't know, and we don't know what we don't know, which is one of the CIA's, you've got to look for the unknown unknowns as well. It's just so very important. The weeds, staying out of the weeds, how does that apply? Want to come in with for that, Anna?
Well, I love the weeds. She says, Celeste says,
Yeah.
stay out of the weeds. But I love the weeds, because the weeds are where the treasure is buried. And so if you say to somebody in mediation, especially in the preliminary discussions, if you're having a private one-to-one conversation with somebody beforehand in pre-mediation, and I find this happens really very often. If you're saying to the person, take me to the place where you know the answer is buried, but perhaps maybe you don't want to go there and dig it up or excavate it. You know, let me come with you. You take me there. And, you know, use my energy, use my presence, use my reassurance. I will stand with you if you want to go into the weeds and to excavate this, to uncover it. And very often, you know, that's the start of a very good line of inquiry for them. And very often people, I've had people really almost breaking down at that point. You know, Ken Cloak has a great question that he asks people. He says, how much of the rest of your life do you want to spend in this conflict? You know, magic question. And very often, I know I do myself out of business, because very often in a preliminary situation, people will say, I don't need to go any further. I know where to look. I've found the answer. I don't need to go to mediation. I know what to do. I can solve it myself from here. And that's the best you can hope for, that people are learning how to do this for themselves. And maybe all they needed was somebody to listen, not to judge them, to be with them, to be patient, to allow them the time, the space, the safe space, and perhaps the energy to be able to go on an exploration of their own. And very often people can do this for themselves in the weeds.
I find your reply fascinating, because what I thought of about the weeds, what was meant by weeds, was don't get into all the nitty-gritty details about what time it was, and was it tomorrow or sorry, was it yesterday, or was Wednesday, and you come up with something incredibly enriching and beautiful, that, and I had never even interpreted it to be that way, which just shows how much we're guided by our own beliefs and values and experiences in life. Bob, and then I come back to Anna. Bob, be prepared to be amazed. You've already said it. Do you want to say anything more about that you haven't added on already, or about conversation competency? Either of those two.
If you can steal a second by talking about weeds just for one more second,
Yes, sure.
is that my interpretation of weeds was actually weeds under the water, where you get trapped. Or any of you who know my gardening skills, and they're not great. I love the analogy that a weed is a flower in the wrong place, and therefore embracing the weeds, you get the flowers and you get the seeds. I'm going to stop there, because otherwise this is going to go. Anyway, being amazed.
Being amazed.
I am constantly amazed by other people. We're in the people business, and people are amazing. People are amazing both positively and negatively. People can be negatively amazing, where they will stick to things long after those things have stopped serving them. And it's amazing about people's tenacity for that. But people's capacity to talk, and people's capacity to listen, and people's capacity to move, particularly when they get that, as you will no doubt canvas for, that paradigm shift. When that happens, and those shifts can only happen in a conversation, they can't happen in a monologue. So the dialogue, and what you hear in dialogue, is always amazing.
Absolutely. Is there anything either of you would add? I'm asking this, of course, because I'm dying to tell you what I would like to add. Is there any tip?
Well, why don't you take this opportunity?
Yeah, tell us, Terry. Tell us.
It's the one. Be curious. Be curious. You know, as Celeste talked about her grandfather. And of course, when I heard this the first time, I went straight to find out who her grandfather was. I don't know if anyone else did that. And I found the most fascinating information, which I'll tell you. But the reason I think it's fascinating, because it gives me a real clue to who she really is. If she was a mediation participant, in a mediation. I was doing that. I have a real clue about perhaps her assumptions, not her assumptions, yeah, when things might go wrong, but her value based on her beliefs. So she says, my grandfather is William Grant still. He's the Dean of African American Composers. His skin was the color of maple syrup, and mine is the color of cafe au lait. My grandfather suffered countless indignities and injustices because of his color. I remember them still, she says, almost viscerally. They still feel personal to me. And she describes when he was the first of the freed, his father had been a slave. So he was experiencing freedom. When he was going to Oberlin College to accept an honorary degree, he drove from Los Angeles with his family. And he couldn't stay at the white hotels because he was black, and he couldn't stay at the black hotels because his wife was white. So he drove 2,300 miles without stopping. And in photos, she says, from that journey, he's stooping, he looks exhausted. And Celeste says, I've heard that story dozens of times, and yet my cheeks still feel hot thinking about it now. It still makes me angry. And I just think, just because of my Irish curiosity or whatever, I got all that information. So so to me, that would be my extra thing to add to having a good conversation, the 11th tip. Anna and Bob, anything to add as a wrap up? Any other extra tips you'd give yourselves, or any?
Go ahead, Bob.
For me, the final takeaway and all is conversations require a minimum of 2 people. Now, you can have a conversation in your own head, and I do lots of that, but the most productive ones are with someone else. And one word of caution, don't assume that applying all these fancy techniques will produce results if you do so in a linear format. It's our job in a conversation to help the other party to get to use some of this. So we've somehow got to give them the tools, be it an accusation, audit, or whatever. We've got to invite them into our space in a very gentle way.
Yes. And Anna.
I think it's lovely that you had the curiosity, Jerry, to go and actually ask the question and to go and actually find out for yourself who her grandfather was. So well done for that. That's why you have brilliant best-selling books, and that's why you're going to write plenty more of them. And I look forward to them. Yeah, I think I'm hoping that Bob got lots of things to put on his list today, because the thing about his list is that he keeps writing this list of things that he's not. You know, he says he's not compassionate, he's not understanding, he's all this load of negative lists. So I'm hoping that by the time we meet up again, that list will have been burnt, and that he will actually write a wonderful new list of all of the things that he is, the positive things. And sometimes we have to focus on the positive, and you know, once we know the negative, I think it's enough then to throw the list in the fire. So I think trainee gardener might be the with potential for great improvement, cultivating a whole new career for him in the future. That might be a good way to start with your positive list, Bob.
I feel a bonfire of the vanities coming on.
Okay. Thank you both. I'm just thinking, I've lived in Kerry for 43 years, and the modus operandi here is, if you're asked a question, you always answer with another question. So that's where it came from. That's the cause of it. So listen, thank you all very much indeed. There's nothing to respond to. Well, Scott Alexander, splendid conversation. Just coming up now. In case there's anything we need. No, my listening skills must be improving, he's saying. Okay, next week, it's first of all, thank you to Alison. I think Alison puts up an end of slide sometime around now. And the next month's, rather, session is a TED Talk from Julia Galliff. And the title is Why You Think You're Right, Even If You're Wrong. And she talks about perspective being everything, especially when it comes to examining your beliefs. And when your steadfast opinions are tested, Galliff asks, what do you most yearn for? Do you yearn to defend your own beliefs, or do you yearn to see the world as clearly as you possibly can? As always, everyone is welcome. And yes, the 16th of April at 1 o'clock. And thank you, Alison, and to Bob and to Anna for your very insightful responses and contributions. And thank you all for doing what it is we've been telling you we should be doing, which is listening as we talk to nonstop. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Thanks, Ellen.
Bye. Thanks, Jerry. Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Bob.